On this episode, we discuss the Dicamba Reregistration of Xtendimax, Tavium, and Engenia products. We talk about the third-party yield data comparing Xtend and Enlist platforms. The EPA comment period on BT corn is in discussion. Make sure your voice is heard by submitting your comments. Stick around for Joe's Halloween-themed corny joke.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Cup of Joe, episode 13, season number 3. Well, it's Halloween, blue moon. What's that all mean? Well, I don't know if you know what a blue moon is, but that's when you have 2 full moons in the same month. And the last time we had a blue moon was 2018. The last time we had a blue moon on Halloween was 1944. So this week was, we have a lot of information to talk about this week, and it's definitely a trick or treat week this week. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room, and let's talk about the Dicamba approval. They got their registration, and it's for 5 years. Now the rest of the story, like Paul Harvey always says, let's talk about what's in that registration and what are things that farmers may have to consider when they're deciding which herbicide trait they're going to use. Who wants to start it off?
I'll start it off. The main things that I've seen in there is they put the buffer up to 240 for downwind, and they put the endangered species buffer to 310 for downwind. They did put some things in there for spraying to help with physical drift by putting some hooded sprayer language in there. And that will help for physical drift. It will not help for volatility at all. But so there's those are some things. They cut the maximum application rate in half from 44 down to 22. So that's a big issue, especially if you happen to be in Tennessee, where they already have resistance to 44. So I don't know what they're going to do down there. They're going to be in a world of hurt if 22 is the maximum rate that they can spray. So there's a lot of problems here with this new registration. I'm sure the Ninth Circuit Court is going to weigh in on this, because I know Wheeler said that they were going to make sure that they complied with that label, but the way I look at it, they didn't comply with hardly anything that they were demanding.
Well, Turk and Ben, I want you to chime in on this. They're putting an additive in. Everybody's got to put an additive in.
Yep.
Well, what's that additive going to cost to the system? Well, I've seen the data from the EPA, and they're estimating between $4 and $12 an acre per application. So let's just use 8. So the system cost just went up $8 because you have to put this additive in to control volatility, because that's the main thing. And Ben, You've studied a little bit of the EPA documents too. Let's talk about volatility. What did the EPA say about volatility? When does it occur?
So they basically talk about how, I think it's the volatility essentially happens between 75 and 80 degrees, and I think that's like 86% of the time the volatility happens between 75 degrees and warmer. And when they also set a June 30th final cutoff date, and in that June 30th final cutoff date, they talk about how often that happens from a national standpoint in all these individual states. So it can be as low as 3.2% of the time. The month of June, we have in Texas, 3.2% of the time we have temperatures below 75 degrees. Now that raises higher to 72% of the time in Minnesota, but that's still not it's not a cure-all, because if they wanted to cure all, they would have put a temperature cutoff on it, because they're seeing that is a major driver for what they're looking for. So it just kind of confuses me why they would have went with a date all the way across. We're going to have more state regulations. I mean, the states are going to have the ability to further mandate and set more regulation in, but it doesn't make any sense why they would go that route with a final cutoff date of June 30th under normal planting situations, because the June 30th under normal planting situations the beans would already be flowering, and you're not allowed to apply after R1 anyway. So it's just kind of strange to me.
And that temperature also has a big effect on the temperature inversions we were talking about as well.
Right.
Well, there's another piece to it too. It's a 48-hour You can't spray if it rains. In other words, if you got showers in the forecast for the next 2 days, beautiful day today, according to the label, you can't spray.
Right.
Because you got 48 hours with no rain. So the compliance in this new label has put even more pressure on the applicator. Now, there's another thing that comes into play too. We know for a fact that Enlist E3 and LibertyLink GT27s have the potential to be 30 to 40% of the market this year. So that's going to make the Dicamba users more in a box. In other words, they're going to have more downwind concerns, and also it's going to be easier to find out where that Dicamba drifted from. So that's a concern. And then we have this other thing that just blows my mind, and that's the non-compliance by not using the proper Dicamba. And I was looking at the EPA studies there, and they said in 2018, 53% of the acres were applied with a non-compliant over-the-top Dicamba, which means either Clarity, Banville, or generic something, which just even makes the problem even worse. So that's what was stirring all things around, and that's where the Ninth Circuit's going to come in.
Yeah.
And, they're going to look at all the information because it's all public, and I don't think the fat lady is sung yet. In other words, I think there's going to be another challenge here.
Do you think a little bit of this is just, the EPA approving this and basically throwing it all against the wall and see what sticks because they know that the Ninth Circuit's going to come down on this, and maybe if they hope for the whole thing, they might get half of it?
Well, I think, Tommy, you're 100% right. I think there's a couple things that come into play. Is that, number one, they needed some type of decision because you got to start somewhere. So they wanted to get it early enough that they could get this all worked out before spring. And then, of course, we do have an election, and and let's face it, there is a lot of folks that like Dicamba. I know we are labeled Dicamba haters, but hey, we think we got a better product, so why would we not be Dicamba haters? But our goal today is just to make sure you're aware of what's behind the curtain, and just make a good decision, whatever you make, and be responsible. And obviously they've got a lot of studies that if they're using the additive, that it will stay home when you follow the temperature thing. Hey, this temperature thing is all too true to me. I spray my dandelions, and I look at the product, and it's Trimec, and it's got Dicamba in it. I don't have any problem with off-target movement, but I'm spraying when it's 60 degrees, 65 degrees, maybe 70 at the most.
April. Yep.
So we know the product can be properly sprayed, but when you're out there spraying and it's 80 and it's high humidity, and there's just no way that volatility, I don't care how much stuff they put in it, because I've seen where they have a 90% confidence that this product's going to do what it's supposed to do. Well, can you be 10% pregnant? The bottom line is, 10% is still a big number, because even a whiff to a soybean field, it causes the cupping.
There's another aspect to this also, Joe, and that's the insurance side of this. We talked about all the additional acres of Enlist soybeans that are going to be in the marketplace this year. It'll be easier to determine who that is. These insurance companies we're aware of several big claims that they paid this year. They're just going to say, we're not going to insure you if you spray Dicamba. So make sure you're checking with your insurance companies. It'll be interesting to see what the retailers are going to do here.
Well, you're exactly right. My brother Henry on the fertilizer side was talking about ammonium nitrate, and after they had some problems with the Oklahoma bombing and all the different things, how ammonium nitrate, the government is going to come in, the government's going to regulate, the government's going to straighten it all out. Guess what? They really didn't do anything. But the insurance companies came in, and they did, and they just said basically if you sell it, you don't have any liability insurance, and it just got very complex, and guess what? It's gone. You virtually cannot buy ammonium nitrate in the market anymore for fertilizer. And I would agree with you, Turk, that's what's going to happen. They're starting to pay some of these claims out, and they're just going to say, hey, if you're spraying Dicamba, it is excluded from liability. We will not cover you. Or they'll make the deductible so high that they'll regulate it out.
Pay it either way.
So there's a lot of attacks coming from all different directions, and there's just a lot of things to think about in making a good, informed decision on what is the best way to kill weeds. There's no question about it.
I will say, kind of being out in the field these last couple weeks, so what I've really noticed was a lot of customers are being turned back on just straight Xtend soybeans and not the XtendFlex soybeans. And if you do have to buy dicamba soybeans, that concerns me a little bit, because if the Ninth Circuit comes in and says, it's a no-go, it's got to be a pre-emerge herbicide, that means you're just Roundup Post on Xtend beans or Liberty on the Flex side of things. So, that's concerning too, as far as not knowing, like you said, beginning of the show, trick or treat.
240 feet, you got to deal with it some way. You got to put some other herbicide on there. So, our system, the Enlist E3 and LibertyLink GT27 system, is still the easier,
absolutely
more compliant system, not something that you're going to have to deal with off-target movement. So anyhow, it's just, we hope that farmers think about all the things we just talked about. My dad always said the best way to make a decision is you put the liabilities in one column and you put the assets in the other, and you total them up, and then you make your decision that way. So that's what they have to do. They have to look at the Enlist E3 system, the LibertyLink GT27 system. They have to look at the Xtend and Extend Flex and add up the pluses and minuses and decide what's going to be the best. Now that brings us to the last topic about this, and there's a lot of data that came out this week that's just saying that the Xtend Flex and Xtend soybeans are just light years ahead of Enlist E3 on yield. And this reminds me of the political ads I'm seeing right now. I just say, well, you can take any test and you can show a win, but the reality of it is, what are the differences, and is there a yield difference? And keep in mind that traits have nothing to do with yield. They're only for the herbicide issue. And at the end of the day, it is the genetics. And Ben, when you prescribe or recommend a soybean to a certain field, what do you like to do when selecting a soybean? Let's just forget about herbicide traits. What do you want to look at to match up for highest yield?
You always try to find the lowest stave in the barrel. You always figure out what's the most yield limiting factor that's out in that field. Is it soil type? Do you have to have a bean that's got a 9 out of 9 stress tolerance? Is it Phytophthora? Is it brown stem rot? Is it white mold? Is it, the list goes on and on and on what the most yield limiting factor is. And then there's a combination. You can combine those different things together. So I need a really defensive bean that has white mold. So we give you, the Cheyenne. It proves itself very well. It can handle all yield environments. So it's you got to figure out what combination of traits and defenses that you need when you're going into that field.
Well, Tommy, I know you've been looking at some of the data, and the first trials is an independent trial ran that's across pretty much our whole marketing area. And I see you're looking at that Southern Iowa trait study. What's it showing?
Well, first of all, Joe, we're talking about...
No pun intended.
No pun intended, yeah. First of all. No, if we're talking about dicamba, I don't understand what all the hoopla is about when we're showing in the first trials, like in the Southern Iowa test, E3 was 7 out of the top 10 as far as results. So,
and that's a summary data sheet.
And that's a summary data sheet. And I encourage guys to look at the first trials, because it's... region after region after region, we're showing out at the top 10 every time as far as E3 genetics. And the LLGT27s are right behind it. So when it comes down to the bottom line and profitability and ease of use, E3 is the way to go with 2,4-D choline, Liberty, Roundup Post options with high yielding in soybeans. So I don't see the negative in trying a product that's going to give you more flexibility and use versus something that's causing a lot of controversy and seems to be not as well as a yielder.
And neighbor friendly.
And it's neighbor friendly.
Iowa State's showing the same thing.
Absolutely.
Sorry to jump in on you there, Joe, but Iowa State, while we're on that topic, Iowa State's showing the exact same thing, because when you look at their summaries, when you take the top 10 out of both, or you take the whole mean test where it's like 13 entries versus 14 entries, there's only a bushel and a half, or there's only a bushel to a half a bushel difference between the Xtend when you average everything out. So, Iowa State's showing that same thing. It's probably not as exaggerated as what you're looking at there as the top 7 out of 10, but even when you look at the entire systems together and average out companies all over the board, at the very least, there's an insignificant difference in yield when you compare the traits.
Ben, I totally agree. I think, again, pick your soybean based on what your limiting factor is. But if you're picking it, if you in your mind think that Xtend Flex and Xtend soybeans are higher yielding soybeans than Enlist E3, I think you're not seeing what we're seeing.
You're probably looking at some bare plot results.
Well, and the other thing too is some of the plots that we get into, we're getting dicamba damage on our products, and then we're doing quite well. In fact, we had one plot this year where the farmer put down dicamba as a pre-emergence and then immediately planted. Well, our soybeans came up, and then they grew sideways for a while, and then finally came up, and we still came in third in a heavily Xtend plot with all the damage. So, the bottom line is we've got a stout lineup in Enlist E3 and LibertyLink GT27s. We'd love to sit down and talk to you about your limiting factors and then get you the right product. But so that's the discussion we wanted to have today about just in general, what are the other things that you need to think about? And I think costs, at the end of the day, costs are a big deal. And I think the Xtend Flex and the Xtend system is a more costly system when you factor in all the extra things that you have to do. And I don't know about you, but most farmers I know don't have a lot of time to deal with extra costs or the extra time to come back and spray a second time on that buffer. So,
did they mention anything about having to retrain all these guys on the new?
It's a requirement. Yeah, the training requirement is still there. Everybody has to be trained.
But how do you know when it's not going to rain for 48 hours? I mean, the forecasters can barely get this afternoon's forecast correct. So that's another one. It's a very complex issue, and we're not trying to make it political. We're just trying to basically tell you what our feelings are and how we see it, and hopefully you guys, farmers out there, will take a good look at it and make your own decision by putting those assets and liabilities side by side. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is EPA right now could phase out corn traits. EPA has got a comment period going on right now till November 9th, but they're talking about phasing out all corn traits because of insect resistance. And in particular, I want to be sure to mention the ones they're talking about, the BT corn hybrids, including Chrome, SmartStack, Double Pro, and AcreMax hybrids. Over the next 3 to 5 years, could be phased out, and only Syngenta's VIP 3A trait hybrids are shown that they have no insect resistance. What we're saying here is that the EPA is saying, hey, these things are showing up resistance. We're going to have you sunset them. We're going to pull them off the market. And that means that they're not going to go, when the patents go off, they're not going to go into the generic market. In other words, they're just going to be taken off and ended, and that'll be it. So November 9th, there's comment period ends. That might be something that you want to consider putting your 2 cents in, because the EPA does pay attention to what farmers have to say about these traits. But some of the problem we have with these traits, again, just like the not using the correct herbicide, particularly in cotton areas, we've got farmers that, again, are not complying by planting a 50% refuge. What they're doing is they're planting wall-to-wall BT products, and that's encouraging resistance. So most of the farmers that are able to plant the refuge in a bag, they're in compliance, so there's no issue. So here's the next thing that the EPA has also talked about. That when they go to get this approved, if that's what they decide to do, then they're going to put the monkey on the seed companies' backs for enforcement. In other words, if we sell you a BT corn product, we're going to have to make sure that you're in compliance with the refuge. In other words, we will not be able to sell you in cotton areas a BT product unless we sell you the appropriate amount of refuge. So, and then if there's a problem, then they're going to fine us. So if we're not following. So I can tell you, as a seed company, I'm really not looking forward to be the enforcement agency for the EPA. In fact, it may have us rethink even selling BT products in the future, because we just don't want to go down that road. I just don't feel comfortable being the enforcement folks, particularly with some seed companies pay no attention to the rules. And in our company, if we say, if you're going to play the game, you play by the rules, and that makes it difficult, and a difficult conversation. So that's something that concerns me too. So don't keep your eye on that one there for sure. The other thing, and I've got a picture I'm going to put up is the some data that we've got Saltro versus Olivo when we have heavy concentrations of SDS and cyst nematodes. We're seeing a 4 bushel advantage with Saltro. And this picture that you're going to see that I'm displaying right now, this was in a controlled environment, and it was put in basically in the lab where they really heavily incubated it with sudden death, Fusarium fungus, and cyst nematodes. So it's definitely an exaggeration, but it is showing the advantage of Saltro because of the fact you don't get that halo effect and you don't get that burn at the beginning. Any other comments from you, Ben, on that?
No, it's just exactly what you said there. It's an exaggerated effect, but that 4 bushel yield advantage I don't necessarily think has to do with that picture. I think that 4 bushels over a wide set of data collection, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's over multiple states and a wide area, and that's in the field.
Yep.
The actual picture was done in the lab.
Correct.
So just something else to think about. Anything else that anybody's, during this special trick or treat Halloween session, the 13th episode of this year. So I mean, what else can go wrong, or it's a little spooky, right?
I got a treat for you to finish off
Okay.
here quick. So Skip helped me accumulate some data here, and these numbers are going to be on the conservative side. So we have more data coming in with high yielding. Some of our best products here, and our Kennedys through our Austins on the Enlist side are probably our highest selling beans that we have. I mean, it's a nice package that fits extremely far south, and it works fairly as we travel north. The Kennedys under 28 data points tested average at 71.03. There's an 84.7 chance to have that crop above 60 bushel based on our plots. I'm going to go through that again on the Monroes. 28 data points, average 68. There's a 77% chance to be above 60. Eisenhower's over 31 test, average 68. There's a 90% chance for your crop to be over 60 bushel based on our plot results. And the Austins on 20 tests averaged 70.4. 78% chance to be above a 60 bushel crop. If you plant all 4 of those in combination, your chances for having at least a 60 bushel crop is an 83.75% chance.
So that was this year's data. Right?
That is this year's data.
So far.
And I have there's some high yielding checks that we've done on like weigh wagon tests and stuff that haven't been included in there. So those numbers are only going to go up as we enter those 85 bushel weigh wagon checks.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about what we've seen on the yield monitor. We've been giving away hitch pins like crazy here in the last few weeks. And again, if you have a yield on your yield monitor, if you can send me a picture of it and send me your name and address and the variety you used, we will send you a hitch pin. You can email it. You can text me, whatever it is that you need to do to get it in, or call your salesman and he'll send it in for you. But we're giving out hitch pins if you share your yield, and we have some unbelievable yields from in this year for our Mershman soybean. So overall, harvest is winding down. There's a few soybeans left out there, particularly in our southern areas. Up around locally here, most of the soybeans are done. Few fields of corn, but next week sounds good for weather. I think a lot of work's going to get done, and my rule of thumb is if you're done by Halloween, you had a great fall. I mean, you had a great fall. So we got a lot of farmers that are focusing on fertilizer. I know our fertilizer side of our business is really picking up, and so let's hope this good weather continues and some positives come out. And don't forget, next Tuesday. Big day, right?
Yep.
Got to vote.
Yep.
You got to vote because the rural folks got to have their say so. And,
Vote early if you get the chance. We did that the other day. That was really easy and really nice too.
So that's your American civic duty to vote. So I always say if you don't vote, you can't complain.
That's right.
So anything else? Well, that brings us to the Halloween jokes to close out this session. And these 2 Halloween jokes, I actually tested them. In other words, I talked to my wife Barb and my son Jeff, and I said, okay, here's my list of Halloween jokes. Which ones do you like? And these are the 2 that they approved, okay? What do you call a witch's garage? What do you call a witch's garage? A broom closet, okay? And then, you know how we like to tell the bar jokes,
Oh,
yeah. We got to have a bar joke. Why did the ghost go into the bar? For the booze.
Yep.
Anyhow, we hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Did not intend to get anybody ruffled with their feathers, but just talk about what are the facts and what are the decisions that you have to make. We sincerely appreciate your support. We appreciate your business. We hope that you and your family are healthy and safe, and we'll see you next week. Take care.